I'm Graham Stevens, and this is a re-recording of the talk I gave at the Barbican Centre on May 21st, 2025, called Pneumatic Avant-Garde, 1965 to 25. So I've been making pneumatic works since 1965. And these on the screen were the two earliest air structures. I'd made a hand sculpture, pneumatic hand sculpture of balloons before, but then we blew it up to full scale. And a statement I wrote in 1968 just about says it all about what I've been doing. Using air as a material, artistic material, and the fact that it's invisible, it has to be using thin membranes to manifest the forces. This is to change our direct experience of air and our atmospheric environment. So the themes I like to talk about are interdisciplinary, make an interdisciplinary talk on air structures and in art, science, law, politics, about everything, anything, nothing as a subject. And how pneumatic art ratcheted up into performance art, architecture, and planning. So the idea is here that you make advances, and this is the avant-garde bit. You make progress and you try and maintain the progress you've made. And these are the ratchets, so you don't fall back and go backwards. The third idea is integrating the pneumatic art into the existing ecological systems. So they're not objects in space, they're combining with the existing environment. So the sixth is a theme of expanding consciousness still holds. And how do air structures maintain itself in the avant-garde, in an avant-garde? So the all-inclusive description of the environment I can think of is to include matter, energy, and information. So air as a material, an artistic material, will form the first part of the talk. And then we'll show a film, atmospheres, and the second part will be called energy structures. And the third, then we'll show this film, Desert Cloud, and the third will be called information systems as art. So to go back to the art world in '65, this is the art world I came into as a student with Rothko doing colour fields, and I was copying Miro, Picasso, Pollock, Bacon, Yves Klein as air, art, architecture, or Leisure Clark as participation, Takis as electromagnetic energy, Richard Hamilton Joe and Joss Tilson pop art, Bridget Riley op art, Signals Gallery kinetic art, including Graph grouped as researched art visual with the environments by Giulio Morale. These were the artists that I was most influenced by attending Signals to all their openings. And arriving at a statement, what I got from the art world in '65 is kinetic art is the art of movement, energy, participation, and environment. So I became a kinetic artist and joined the avant-garde in '65. At the same time, I was studying architecture. at university under Professor J.K. Page, Professor of Environmental Science. He was a leading meteorologist. He wrote The Climate in Towns, note for the World Meteorological Organization. And I got from him that the whole idea of shifting from putting the object of the building in the climate to be affected by the climate into buildings articulate the climate. So you're affecting the climate, having an interchange between the climate and the building. Professor Geoffrey Broadbent designed systems. He wrote the book summarizing his course in 1973, Design in Architecture, Architecture and the Human Sciences, which covered the whole intellectual panorama at the time, including communications theory of Professor Donald Mackay, who's in the architectural, he wasn't in the architectural department. And this is one of the innovations we had in the university. Instead of the lecturers coming to teach us in the lecture hall, we went to each department in the university, which made a huge difference to pick up all sorts of language, parts of the language and the practice of the different disciplines in the engineering department, for instance, or the chemistry department, or the psychology department. So with Professor Donald Mackay who was teaching environmental psychology, we did experiments on communication theory. And as Geoffrey Broadbent had also introduced us to the communication theory of Cherry and Shannon Weaver or Saussure, we did experiments on psychology. And I would summarize that by saying environmental participation forms perception from the signifier and the signified. We'll talk about that later. During the course, I did a year out for professional practice. And during that year, I went to Paris, the International Union of Architects conference. And there I met Mr. Fuller, who was exhibiting in the Tuileries Garden with Keith Critchlow, Utopia, and he gave a paper at the International Union of Architects Congress that year entitled Utopia or Oblivion. And that was when I first took away the idea of that the human species is the first that has to choose whether to survive, that we were in control of the planet, control of our environment, and it was up to us whether we survived or not. The architect I was most influenced at the time, he wasn't teaching at the university, but we were listening to his lectures at the AA, was Cedric Price, author of The Fun Palace. And what I got from him was that the solution is not always a building. So he could propose any sort of system or propose that the client do something else. So this is how I met Buckminster Fuller on the terrace of the Palais de Versailles, the World Congress. And his geodesic domes use compressive structures. And this was the exhibition he was building with Keith Critchlow in the Tuileries Gardens in '65 as part of the International Union of Architects Congress, as part of the World Design Science Decade, 65 to 75. And alongside Buckminster Fuller doing compressive struts, Prialto was doing tensile membrane structures. I met him at the first colloquium of pneumatic structures in '67 in Stuttgart as part of an international congress on by the International Association of Shell Structures. Now, during the talk, Design Systems by Professor Broadbent, he was introducing philosophy and science of environment. And the key things I got from this was the idea from Darwin, which is usually not understood as only species that fit their environment survive. It's usually reversed to saying that it's the animals that are the fittest, i.e. the strongest, that can overcome the other animals that survive. Whereas what he was actually talking about was holistic environmental concept of species fitting into their environment. If they don't fit their environment, then they don't survive. From Freud, I fell in love with knowledge itself, basically. Knowledge is the big other. So as to what you respect and relate to is knowledge itself in learning. From Einstein, I got the idea that environment, he thought that environment is everything that is not me, whereas I say that environment is everything, including me. And that points to his distinction between himself as a person in space, as opposed to quantum mechanics, which Heisenberg combined by saying energy is the fundamental substance of which the world is made, in terms of everything being made of energy, and that we are a continuum, in other words, with the environment. We're part of the environment. There's no distinction apart from difference in density in the same environment. From Levi-Strauss, Buckminster Fuller and Freire obviously fit into structuralism as the relation of the parts determines the function of the whole. This is quoted from Jacques Lacan, who I was obviously influenced by, but not, I wasn't conscious of him as a philosopher or psychoanalyst, in fact. But I was taking up his ideas on structuralism. So, first part, section 1, air as an artistic material. This is as opposed to air, to art being painting and sculpture made of metal or clay and painting with paint. To use air as an artistic material. And we're being taught systems theory, main thing by Professor Broadbent, which everything can be understood as a system. So in kinetic art, in other words, everything is moving and it's operating according to a system. It's not a static object in space. Now, the way Geoffrey Broadbent taught was that basically the whole design process can be broken down into 3 stages. Firstly, collecting information. The second, playing around with the information and orienting to some kind of question you want to make a particular object or design something. And the third one is to allow the brain to solve the problem with an idea by doing nothing, going off and doing something else. And I remember that following this system back in '65, and for a condiment set, I came up with the idea of putting salt, pepper, and vinegar in a toy balloon. And I remember the instant this idea came to me after I'd been thinking about it, playing around with ideas, various other systems. But then as I was crossing a street with 1 foot off the curb, judging the speed of an approaching car as to whether I could get across the street, then this flash of realization came as to a balloon being a container which would expand and contract, and you would be able to hold it in your hand and feel the salt, pepper, and vinegar, the difference in the solid state or liquid state or material state, granular state. You'd be able to have the tactile sensation of this kind of elastic touch, as I called it. So there's a sculpture and a design. And for the arts festival that year, we designed simply a balloon to get bigger and bigger. I've always thought it was a big advantage in not knowing anything about air structures. We did actually see a tiny little thumbnail sketch of the roof of an air structure, but we weren't very good students in research. So we just went ahead and thought, we'll just make a big balloon, and progressed from there and learnt through our mistakes, and not being aware of Fuller's idea of, he used pneumatics to erect geodesic domes, for example, or pneumatic pillows in the segments of his geodesic domes. And Freotto did enormous numbers of studies, but all his work came out in a book the following year after '66. The book Tensile Structures came out in 1967. So we built this from scratch and found out how it would work. But the idea was to take all the kinetic artworks and put them in some kind of kinetic environment. And so this structure is not a static structure, and unlike most air structures, which are designed towards being a static object, but are always dynamic objects. This was designed to become a continually dynamic structure, where these you can see the interior of the structure as you saw at the beginning, to catch the wind and continually move the internal flaps around, so that the structure was a great heaving mass. And as the students, we wrote a report about what we were trying to do, and the main thing was a total architecture to affect all the senses. So this is trying to create an environment where you were actually immersed in the environment, and it was activating all the senses at the same time to become aware and to experience the environment. And I did this sketch later to differentiate from normal painting and sculpture. You can see here a sculpture in front of a painting, and you can obviously, in a gallery, you can walk around the sculpture, or you can stand and walk past the painting, look at the painting. But I was in my studio in the arts group in Sheffield University I set up. I had a studio there, so I was painting and putting the canvas taking it off the wall and putting it on the floor and walking onto the surface of the painting. So I'd be in the work, as opposed to Rothko, a color field that you can contemplate and look at from many different positions, any different positions. This was walking onto the surface. Then the next step was to put my head inside a transparent bag, which colored the air inside, and you saw the red balloon inside a red environment. So that was immersing the head, advancing from holding a sculpture in the hand to putting the head into a space. So again, that was the beginnings of immersive structures. And finally, it was to take the canvas off the wall and enclose the observer. So the observer changes from an observer to a participant. He's literally a part of the work. He's inside the work. What he does or she does affects the work, how it moves, how it behaves. And there's 4 drawings of putting different air, water, or solids into a balloon. And at the bottom is a sketch of the whole drawing, where it's a space field being a field of electromagnetic field, as well as the field of space, Einsteinian space. And one of the works I did there was to use the electromagnetic field to light up neon tubes. You pick up a neon tube and walk into the field, and it lights up with no wireless. So you become aware of electromagnetic environment being surrounding everything, transmitting through everything. So here it's showing the internal panels that slide around the interior of the balloon or air structure. And the whole air structure, when it heaves around in the wind, it's a very particular sensation being inside, which the important point here is that the experience can't be had on the single plane or the two-dimensional plane. You have to be inside to get the experience. Your senses don't work looking at the structure from outside. So the works here were walking using the kinesthetic sense. So that's to engage the whole body into walking. So most of my works are using kinesthetic sense of walking. The walking being the simplest kinesthetic experience. And obviously it's on the earth. The anchorage, we used sacks of sand, which eventually became the beanbag. By changing the sand into polystyrene granules, enlarging the sack until it became a beanbag to sit on. Now this slide is the best to show the monochromatic environment, which was again completely changes the art experience. Standing in a gallery, you're looking at light reflecting off a painting or a sculpture. Whereas here you're in an environment, the light is being transmitted through the canvas onto you and colouring the air rather than the surface. You see a colour surface, obviously, but you're also aware of the atmosphere itself being coloured. You're inside the colour. You're fully immersed inside the colour. And if you strike a match, for example, you will see the complementary colour of the red floating around in the form of green clouds. And so the experience of the work is taking place inside the head. And it can't be seen in any other form but the environment, the four-dimensional environment. Electromagnetic neon field was the using neon to light up and experience the performance. We call it the beginning of performing environmental electromagnetic forces. So Anish Kapoor did this work in 2011, which is more or less repeating the same idea. In the Grand Palais in Paris in 2011. So this is creating the same experience. This brings introduces the idea of when the work is copied and when it's influenced. I would say that the monochromatic environment is an invention, which whenever it's copied, it is copied rather than a mere influence. The same year, I went straight from university to talk with Gustav Metzger and Mark Boyle, and they invited me to take part in this Destruction in Art Symposium. It was taking place all over London with 100 international artists. Outside the normal gallery system, it was funded. My work was funded by the Arts Council for the first time, and but others were self-funded or funded from different resources. And these are all the collaborations involved in the Destruction Art Symposium, and the groups that we formed, all in this one festival, symposium. There's a symposium in the Africa Centre where most of the artists gave talks. Yoko Ono came to perform a piece in my space field, which I changed the name of space field into pneumatic environment. And she did a bag piece inside the pneumatic environment. So she was inside a bag, inside the balloon. And Elsa Hansen did a piece, a coin piece. I spoke to Alan Caprow in New York when he was doing a soft skyscraper happening. At the same time, I was asking for a few tips. Basically, he said, just go and do it, see what happens. Then the environment, pneumatic environment group, two artists who came to the show, Jeffrey Shaw and Theo Botchaiver. We had a great discussion at the barrier to the work, and they said that they'd be invited to the Holland Festival the following year. And after we talked for an hour or so, we thought it'd be a very good idea to all form a group and exhibit together in the Holland Festival. And then we continued having meetings in London, in Soho, for a while. And then they went back to Holland, where I was sending all the drawings to them in Holland. And by that time, the group had expanded to include Sean Wellis de Mille and Cheba Van Tieren and Peter Boersma, the photographer. Environment Group was another group of artists, a very well-established group of artists, including Richard Hamilton and Harold Cohen, Joe and Joss Tilson, Richard Smith, and the architect Cedric Price. And they had been invited, or were trying to promote, an Arts Council exhibition in St James's Square, outside the Arts Council building in St James's Square. We had several meetings at that, and I proposed one of the works I'd developed at the pneumatic environment called a zip tube. Another group was the artist placement group. John Latham and his wife Barbara was helping him with Geoffrey Shaw, I think. Geoffrey Shaw was helping him doing a book burning. And they formed a group with Mark Boyle and Joan Hills called the Artist Placement Group to try and systematize the idea of working with industry. And they're very interested in me having built my space field in a borrowed factory over a weekend. With the 6 students, we just borrowed the factory of Intertherm, and high frequency welded the whole structure up over a weekend. So that's a good example of collaborating with industry. And Professor Page had given me my first roll of polythene tubing from the physics department of the university, which was to feature greatly in a lot of structures. Polythene tubing, the manufacturing process being to inflate the polythene, the hot polythene, into an inflated tube, and then to cut it. It's only afterwards that it's slit into a flat sheet, but it's made as inflatable, inflatable rolls of inflatable tubing. The other people who came, very important, Molly Parkin and Peter Murray, from Nova magazine, and they commissioned a domed mattress. And the idea is, so she asked me what I could do for the cover of the magazine. And I suggested putting a mattress inside a dome. I had an inflated pillow inside the pneumatic environment, and a tube of water, a polythene tube filled with water in the structure itself. And she was the first to suggest that I patent the works, which is an unusual thing for an artist to do at the time. I certainly hadn't had it, although Yves Klein had patented a pneumatic rocket. I wasn't aware of that. But she suggested patenting the works. And of course, to get a patent, the work has to be novel, so it would qualify very well to confirming it was actually a new work that hadn't been done before. It's much more stringent than copyright. um, you have to prove that no one else has ever done it before. These were all reported in Studio International in September and Art and Artists in October. So the polythene tube of water turned into that was used for walking on water, just walking on top of the tube, and that turned into the waterbed. And which is now worldwide, of course. I think the turnover in 1992, I remember being reported in the New York Times as being $2.2 billion in America alone, that is. And so this is a pillow for walking on air. We had a version of this inside the structure. And this is something called magic membrane, which is a membrane that could be folded into many different shapes and configurations, with patented systems for connection and sealing the air to make airtight volumes. But basically, this photograph to show you a simple pillow. And the problem is it's great to walk on and bounce on, which probably many people have done through the ages. But there's a problem of falling off. So I then made some sketches to flatten the surface to make it a flat membrane that would also continue to be possible to bounce on. So the inventive process, if you like, goes from the pillow to the mattress to the bouncy castle when you put a dome over the top of the mattress. And this is required by the Copyright Designs and Patent Acts to show what the inventive steps are that you've made to make an invention that hasn't been made before and been done before. Now that would, of course, apply to the monochromatic environment that hadn't been applied, that hadn't been made before. And I met a scientist 10 years later who actually, Dr. Chris Evans of the National Physical Laboratory, who said he'd been trying to make this kind of environment, coloured environment, for about 10 years, but hadn't been able to do it. So it was an inventive step that hadn't been done before, but I didn't try to get the patent on that. But the usefulness of the patent, of course, is it does register the date of the invention. But when the protection has run out, the patents only last for 19 years, and you have to pay every year. The group, Pneumatic Environment, with Jeffrey Shaw and Botchiver and Sean Wellesley Miller and Cheva Van Tien and Boersma, they made their proposal. This is the proposal they made to the Holland Festival with the group, with Theo as an industrial designer, Jeffrey Shaw as an artist, me as an architect, which I wasn't, and Peter Boersma as a photographer. And this is the proposal, the photograph and text of a program of how to use the various structures to be made. And this is a photograph of Pneumatic Environment in Battersea Park in '66. using the polythene tubing for two works. One was what I call an atmospheric probe, probing the atmosphere. So going from pneumatic containment into open systems, probing the atmosphere, and also a zip tube, which we'll come on to later. But this is the first time it's been used as a play surface. So in Battersea, we had the beginnings of the bouncy castle and the beginnings of waterbed, walking on earth, air, fire, and water. And this is the drawing I sent for the fabrication of the air structure in Holland, which I was going to do by going over and making it in a factory in Holland for the festival. But unknown to me, MI5 had become interested, as far as I know, and this is the evidence for the MI5 being interested. As the Director General of MI5, Dame Stella Remington, came on television in 2003 to apologise to me and 5,000 others for the odd things that MI5 did during the early 70s. And this was a contemporary author, Wolf Mankiewicz, who was followed also from as early as following the war. But he was certainly followed in 67. And they tried to get rid of him from the BBC, who nobly refused, as he was making good plays. But it does show that it's a very unbalanced contest. You have no idea that you're being followed. But I had this extraordinary experience of arriving in Holland for this exhibition and being arrested once I got off the boat and put in a cell and being asked to prove why I was coming to Holland. When I said I was coming for the Holland Festival with a group called Sigma Centrum, they asked for the telephone number, which they duly phoned, and saying that there's no reply. And I had to inform them there wouldn't be anyone there until at least 11:30 in the morning. This was about 7:30 in the morning. But they wouldn't accept this, and they put me on a boat with an immigration officer who escorted me back to England. And then not only on the boat, but he then got on the train with me to London and escorted me all the way to London. Now, it's not until the present century that I found out that the only way this could have been done was by a request from the British border control to stop me going into Holland, because it would have had to have been done by cooperation with the Dutch and British authorities. But I forgot this whole thing. I just thought they got out of bed the wrong side or something. But it did have a huge impact on the subsequent development of air art. In that the structure was constructed by the group as I'd requested, and performed without me, which of course was fine as far as it went. I was the only one to miss out. But then afterwards, when all the invitations came pouring in to perform at other venues, then I wasn't getting the invitations. And so this distinguishes the invention of the work and the performance of the work. So event structure research group, which the environment group, was then renamed by Teo and Jeffrey and Sean as the event structure research group. And they began performing these structures throughout Europe and America. This is a performance in '72 of Zip Tube, which I did I invented this in '66. And I have a small example of this. Is more or less exactly the same scale as I made in '66. With a small handheld fan and a tube, small tube attached. I attached a silver tube, Melinex silver tube. And the way this works is that the pressure closes off and forms a block in the tube, which travels up the tube until it's released at the end. The end of the tube releases the pressure. When the pressure is released, then of course the whole tube collapses and the cycle starts over again. Now, this is one of the first sculptures that I tried to mass produce with Jeremy Fry of Fry's Turkish Delight fame. He formed a company called Unlimited Limited to manufacture these. I was also proposing to manufacture the Transmobile and the color liquid sensors. And the Unlimited Limited didn't succeed. They also produced Takis from Signals Gallery, and they were selling multiple signals, but they were so cheap, I think at £15 each, that it was very difficult to persuade people to send the check back in payment. And so it was more or less impossible to sell them, which is a great shame because it's a great idea and it was a very good way of selling cheap works as well. I then went on to make 7 different ways of walking on water. And this shows the 6 different ways, omitting the water plank, which is the plank is very popular today, walking, which we didn't get around to photographing because for a start, we invented it by, there's a huge block of polystyrene floating in the docks. And it's just a question of standing on it as a plank, but it's stiff. So in some ways, we thought it wasn't quite qualifying as a pneumatic. Of course, polystyrene is inflated. And the idea was to make it of a different material, an inflatable material called Resilotex, which forms a flat surface when inflated. But we couldn't afford it, so we never got around to making one. But these are the 6 other ways of walking on water: the waterbed, the Transmobile, water boots, a hovercraft inside a tube as a hover tube, or a tube at sea, walking on the waves, you're walking on ocean waves, or walking on still water, all very different sensations. This was one done recently in 2009 at a psychiatric hospital, which is the original waterbed configuration, which is an interesting demonstration of the effect psychologically on physically being involved in the sculpture, where you become part of the work. So we had the patients making these bags of water and walking on them. And at a sort of debriefing afterwards, suddenly someone who had been mute suddenly started talking, to the great surprise of all the doctors and all the patients as well. And so we spent a long time trying to figure out what caused or enabled the person to speak. And we came to the conclusion that it was very much to do with the relation of the patient to the bag of walking on the water and being unable to be in a closed down. They were aware, even if they weren't producing it themselves, they were aware of the communication with other people walking on the water and feeling the movement of the water through the body. And this somehow stimulated the person to simply come out of their state and start talking. This is an exhibition we had in '74 of the bouncy castle. We didn't get into the market. We're very late in the market with bouncy castles. But this is the first one that was exhibited in its different configurations. You know, it could make from one membrane. I'll show it later. There's shows a good idea of the continuous evocation of the body energy relating to other people. You can't not bounce, even if you're lying, you're still moving. And that again is the mattress slowly transforming into a pillow. It shows the sealing detail, which has a flap inside which self-seals against the opening. So it forms a very good seal. This is a transmobile, which is a transparent cube which you can walk over land or water. And the first I always think of this as a psychological space, as most people don't realize that you can hear every word they say. So there's very good communication between. It's usually assumed to be one way. Echoes of wandering lonely as a cloud, I think. And that's the transmobile on water. I was showing all these as they developed to Jeffrey or Teo or event structure, and then they would go away and perform them. And from 1968, I had a wonderful studio in the Eye Warehouse in St. Catherine's Dock. This is the beginnings of space, arranged by Bridget Riley and Peter Sedgley, who arranged with the Port of London Authority that artists could use the space before it was developed, which began in 1970. That's another example of the transmobile with a colour which you could go inside or carry around, which is part of a group, the Exploding Galaxy, which had formed out of the Signals Gallery, which collapsed in 66. It was open between 64 and 66. But due to the Paul Keeler's father withdrawing the sponsorship, then it collapsed. Very unfortunate, because they'd built up a stock of some of the leading avant-garde artists at the time: Hello Oiticica, Alicia Clark, Cruz Diaz, which all had to be sold in RA. So, following on from the sketch of what changes in the experience, I think this is one of the best expressed by Lacan, describing the traditional art relation of painting and sculpture, where the truth can only be evoked in that dimension of alibi, which all call realism. In creative work, takes its virtue from metonymy, where we accede to the meaning. So we're putting our own participation, our own interpretation, taking meaning from the work, in other words. So we all take something different. And the artist is hoping that we're taking something similar. And it's the metaphor, which is the unique key in painting and sculpture, which, according to Saussure, is the signifier of the work. And the signified is the interpretation. And Lacan says Freud discovered this place between the signified and the signifier. For if what Freud discovered isn't that, it isn't anything. So this is the key to, and a very important key to psychoanalysis of how we are conscious in the world. The interpretation of the signified, of the signifier, at which the signified becomes conscious. So it's the signified which is what the individual participant is conscious of. And that, of course, what it signifies to each individual is different. And this is part of kinetic art, is that the realization that we're all experiencing something slightly different, and maybe very different when we're experiencing works of art. And perhaps the communication value of art is bringing those consciousness levels in line with each other. But it's very, very dependent on the play of the language and the senses as to how the whole thing operates together. So if we think of Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am, performing tactile kinesthetic experience is more that I sense, therefore I am. And there's no thought involved in the manual. Well, it's conditional, of course, on what the work is. But in this air structures, Lacan overcomes the objection of being objectified with an addition. I think, therefore I am. Where I think, there I am. I'm thinking where I am. So if I'm thinking I'm in Spain, I am in Spain in thought. But then he went on to say, I think where I'm not. Therefore, I am where I think not. So you can only be, in a sense, in contact with reality where you're not thinking. If you're thinking, thinking is taking you away from reality, it's not taking you into reality. So the idea with participation works is that when you're performing real phenomena, participating in creating a reality of some sort. Then Lacan concluded, I think of what I am wherever I don't think I'm thinking. So the sensory response required to experience walking on earth, air, or water in a transmitter, for example, just precludes thinking of thinking. You're only concentrating on operating the transmobile and being in the transmobile. So it gives a novel aesthetic sense of being in relation to the environment. And I would claim that this is becoming closer to reality itself. So when you look at any sculpture or painting as an object, they are an object in space, and you have to contemplate and imagine, bring in imagination of something else than what you are in yourself, which is a very, very major distinction between the two forms of experience. There's 6 other international avant-garde artists. We held an exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art in Oxford, where David Mdala was from the Philippines. He was doing performance art. Leisure Clark was doing participation art. Elio Tesika, sensing the environment. John Duggar was using body sensing. Li Yuanxia was contemplating the environment. And I was doing, like all architecture, is building reality in itself. And that's where my works always continually fluctuate between art and architecture, and often are indistinguishable as to whether it's architectural or artistic space. David and John closed the exhibition on the opening night from over participation. This was due to people getting too excited, which may or may not have been due to getting very active, overactive on the bouncy mattress upstairs, being continued downstairs, which is often a problem in exhibiting air structures inside buildings. This is, again, the studio in St. Catherine's Dock, where I was building structures for earth, air, fire, and water, to walk on the water, to fly in the air, and to have inter layers of air between air and water to get different sensations of the environment. So here, what may be signified by being shown with the Tower of London behind is it may signify the drawbridge. Whereas if you look from the other way, I think the signifier itself would be the air structures. So the environment interrelates with the meaning of the work as to how you interpret. But you're always in a reality at the location of the work. And of course, with the photographs can only evoke what was happening. You can never recreate the sensation except by actually doing it, which with the bouncy castle and waterbed zip tube, and so on, are constantly repeated all over the world. And have been used for many different functions, including this is a rock concert, or we had a ball in Oxford University. Here's another example of a performance by my stuntman, which was created fortuitously when the local fire brigade came to test their foam machine, which made it a fantastic visual images. Taking completely different aspect of phenomena to use negative pressure rather than positive, to create negative space by evacuating a beanbag, for instance. The the beans can take the shape of anyone sitting on the beanbag and forms a rigid structure, which is maintained by atmospheric pressure, being greater than the internal pressure. And this can be used for forming many different shapes, infinite number of different shapes. The interesting thing about this also is that the Pompidou bought this for a four-figure sum, because the interest is in the actual moment of creation out of nothing. You're creating on the paper. So this is transmitting the thought process. So it's original and shows the idea, the context. I came across this in a show in 2010 where they're demonstrating the same phenomenon by the balloon deflates as the atmosphere gets on. So the marshmallows get smaller and smaller. Use these? The pressure inside the bottle returns to atmospheric pressure from a vacuum. This is a catalogue for the 72 locations Edinburgh, where it took the idea of locations to Edinburgh, did a work on the King Arthur's seat on the lake, St Anne's Lake, and walked on water in St Anne's Lake, but showed the ones, previous ones with the hover tube inside a wave tube. The wave tube going out to sea. I have some more of that later. So the signified for me is the way the tube takes the energy from the waves, and it can be used to extract energy from the waves. This is where I became much more interested in or aware of the energy transformations going on from the body energy transformations. And by putting a tube, this is for a BBC omnibus film, where we put a tube starting in the air and going over the land onto the water and under the water to show the continuous transformation. That's part of the erection process. and that is the evening entertainment. Where one of our group was the rock star Mike Welsh, who wrote Waterloo Road. It shows the scale of the tube. This is all in the movie. That's in Edinburgh, walking on water. The formula for the tension in the membrane for all air structures is a product of the pressure, internal pressure, and the radius of curvature of the tube over 2. So this means that as the radius goes down, it gets smaller, the pressure goes down. So therefore, the tension in the membrane gets slacker, lower. And so you go from a walking position where the radius is larger to the smaller radius where the tension, where the pressure is lower, the tension is lower, and you sink down into the water. Obviously a very low pressure at that point. And this is the hover tube. The idea here is that the hover tube, just by tilting forward or backwards, it would self-propel forwards or backwards. And the energy, the wave, it would be like a surfboard going along the tube. So it's using the energy in the environment. But of course, the same mechanisms can be used to take energy from the waves for wave energy devices. So I was continually trying to extend the possibility of the structure. And this is the exhibition in the Paris Biennale de Jeune in 71, where it's the most complicated structure that's been built. I think still it's the most complicated, as it has a tube which is folded on itself to make and then inflated inside here. This is inside this tube here, and it has a hanging deck from the ceiling. That's me up there on the platform with a light show projected from the platform. And then it does a half circle to its open system here, which can be a space for more active bouncing, whereas inside the dome was simply waterbeds for very calming movement. And then the tube returns on itself, so you get a multi-story tube, multi-story structure. And this is the computer. I think it's the first computer-operated structure for controlling the operation of the environment. Did things like generating light shows, but also sound, where it would generate double the wavelengths, and so your voice would change in pitch and lower, and so you'd sound differently as you spoke. This is it all fitted into this is the pneumatic environment as a cinema or theatre, which could be put into the back of a state car. For example, for use as a cinema or theatre in the Fun City Pop Festival, Cedric Price, architect of the Fun Palace. This is according to Janine Marshy-Salt, in her wonderful book, Ecstatic Worlds, Media Utopias, Environment. She links environmental artists and architects from Patrick Geddes onwards through Cedric Price, and says that in this fun city, it was the closest we came to realizing this ecstatic world. And reality is not always the same as you imagine. This is walking on fire on top of a volcano I did a tour of America, walking on earth, air, fire, and water, arriving at a university and making a transmobile with the students, then walking on the water in whatever water was available in the university. I toured some 14 universities and states. I gave the cum laude lecture in Austin, Texas for that year, where we made the walking on water and then projected the photographs in the lecture in the evening. So this is the manufacturing. Eddie Kurikundis funded the formation of Airplay Limited to mass produce bouncy castles in '74, which worked very well, but there are various reasons why it didn't take off. It became a selling technique which I wasn't that interested in doing the same thing or repeatedly. So I was more interested in inventing new things rather than repeating the same thing. It's also very late in the market. And the structure we were selling, which was the magic membrane, in fact, was rather complicated to teach people to learn how to use. So much more simplified versions took over. But in the end, and the end is achieved by being distributed worldwide. So that there's not many towns or cities in the world where you can't bounce on a bouncy castle. And this is the process of erecting it. So the idea is not to be in a fairground. I introduced it to fairgrounds in about 1975, I think. But originally it was in parks where it was just a public facility for anyone, grown-ups as well as children, to bounce around. At the same time, with the technology, we're designing industrial equipment. This is an idea that goes along with oil pollution booms, which I worked a long time for over a few years with a firm called Skimex for oil pollution boom technology. This is an idea for, I called it a Moses ring, for making a hole in the sea where it's a torus with a skirt hanging underneath, which you could then pump out the water to get access to the seabed. Then in '76, the world's largest ever exhibition on Islam, still is the largest ever exhibition, I think, It occupied practically every venue in London, from the V&A to Hayward Gallery, and also in towns across England, with exhibiting every technique, art technique, rugs or pottery, or and then afterwards, I took my friend Bodo Rasch to meet the director, Paul Kilo, who's the director of Signals. And he brought a friend of his along from Saudi Arabia. And they formed a company to tour the exhibition worldwide. So this is a structure that was designed to put on a jumbo jet and fly between New York and Tokyo and London with the World of Islam Festival. This is a particular modeling technique I developed. Now it's all done on computers, but there it's an analog computer maquette. Eventually, the exhibition got so large that it wasn't really practical to travel it. So in the end, it didn't happen. This is an idea that it came out of a conference in Stuttgart, the Lightweight Structure Institute in Stuttgart University, with Frauto and Bodo Rasch, who invited several conferences a year for the different technologies developing. And this was one called Biology of Building. And the conclusion of the conference was that cell grew by every living cell is pneumatic. And later, as reported in Scientific American, that it also grew by compressive struts like Bucky Fuller. So all cells grow by this dual process of compression and expansion. And it's by combining the two forms. That's how we all grow, and plants as well as animals. So now to bring up to date, this is 23, doing a pneumatic work in France. It's called interpenetration, where I just take a tube and go through all the windows and openings, and then it comes outside underneath the building and onto the river. And the tube is formed into this beautiful straight line by the flow of the water until it submerges at the end. And at the other end of the tube, in between the bridge and the watermill, ex-watermill, it forms into a totem. But there are many ideas as go through each room. You have a different form of pneumatic, and different sensation, different connotations or signifiers. But of course, here it's the environment. It's more about the environment than about the tube. The tube is just to accentuate the beauty of the environment.